It is now my pleasure to introduce Professor Hariz Halilovich, Professor of Anthropology at RMIT University in Melbourne.
Thank you, Iris. Good afternoon, Your Excellencies, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen. Is it good now? I can lean forward. It's a great honor indeed to be on a panel with historical figures, Sir Geoffrey Nice and Mr. Wolfgang Petritsch. I feel humbled and honored. So I'd like to start by acknowledging my colleagues and friends at the Gesellschaft Bosnian Academiker in Österreich, whose long-standing public commitment to safeguarding and promoting the historical truth about the aggression against the Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina and the genocide in Srebrenica has been both invaluable and inspiring. I thank Mr. Siraj Duhan for his team and for co-organizing and hosting this conference, as well as many other important scholarly, cultural, and commemorative events dedicated to preserving the memory of Srebrenica. I also acknowledge and thank Mr. Asim Dorović, Minister Chancellor at the Permanent Mission of Bosnia and Herzegovina to the OSCE, United Nations Office, and other international organizations. I extend a warm welcome to all of you in the audience. Your presence honors this conference and reflects not only your civic engagement with Srebrenica and Bosnia, but also a long-standing commitment to truth, justice, and remembrance. For me, speaking about Srebrenica is never simply an academic exercise. I was born there, and like thousands of others from my hometown, my life has been permanently shaped by what happened in July 1995. While I survived because I was outside the enclave when the genocide occurred, members of my extended family, neighbors, and childhood friends did not. My birthday place became a place of death, a landscape of mass graves, absences, and unfinished mourning. That experience has also shaped my work as a scholar. Over the past 2.5 decades, I have tried to understand not only what genocide destroys, but also what comes afterwards, how people rebuild lives after mass violence, how memory becomes woven into everyday life, and how survivors continue living when the past remains politically contested. Anthropology, my own discipline, is particularly well placed to ask these questions because it is concerned not only with the moments of extraordinary violence, but also with the ordinary lives that follow. 31 years after the genocide, Srebrenica occupies a deeply paradoxical place. It has become one of the world's most recognized symbols of genocide since the Holocaust. The crimes have been established through extensive scholarship, forensic investigation, and international court judgments. Yet at the same time, they continue to be denied, relativized, and politically manipulated. For many survivors, then, genocide has never become simply history. It remains an ongoing social reality. This is why I suggest we think of genocide not only as an event, but as a social process whose consequences continue to unfold long after the killing stops. Genocide destroys far more than individual lives. It ruptures families, communities, moral worlds, local cosmologies, and imagined futures. In Srebrenica, even death itself was denied closure. Bodies were removed from primary mass graves and reburied elsewhere in an attempt to conceal the crime. Families waited for years, sometimes decades, before recovering only fragments of their loved ones. Some are still waiting today. What emerged from this violence was not simply displacement, but something more complex. Survivors rebuilt their lives across Bosnia, Europe, North America, and Australia. Yet few experienced this as a clean break with the past. Instead, they came to inhabit what I have elsewhere described as translocal afterlives. Home ceased to be a single location. Instead, it became dispersed across remembered places, new countries, family networks, and annual journeys to Potocari. Belonging itself became the stretch across multiple landscapes. One woman I met during my fieldwork in Melbourne captured this beautifully. Every July, she prepared food for the local commemoration, exactly as the ones had for family gatherings in eastern Bosnia. At the same time, she watched the burial ceremony in Potocari live on television, while speaking by phone with relatives who were attending in person. She described herself as being in two places at once, both here and there. That simple observation captures something that scholarship and policy often overlook. Displacement did not sever attachment to place. It transformed the ways in which place could be re-inhabited and reimagined. Memory, therefore, does not reside only in monuments and museums. It is carried in everyday practices, in family conversations, photographs on living room walls, names given to children, annual journeys, recipes prepared for commemorative gatherings, and the quiet rituals through which absence becomes part of ordinary life. These everyday acts matter because they continually reconnect dispersed communities. Every July, thousands gather at the Memorial Center in Potocari, while thousands more assemble simultaneously in cities such as St. Louis, Melbourne, Stockholm, Vienna, and many other places. These commemorations are not simply symbolic reflections on what happens in Bosnia. Together, they create a shared commemorative landscape that transcends national borders. Srebrenica has become both a local place and a global moral geography. Many young Bosnians born after 1995 have no direct memory of the genocide, yet they have grown up in its shadow. They inherit photographs of relatives they never met, stories interrupted by silence, annual commemorations and family absences that require continued explanation. In some families, children even carry the names of murdered grandfathers, uncles, and cousins. For these young people, the experience of seeing their own names inscribed on the memorial wall or engraved on the white marble headstones in Potocari collapses the distance between past and present, making the legacy of genocide deeply personal. Trauma then is not inherited simply as psychological sufferings. It is transmitted through relationships, rituals, and everyday life. But inheritance is never only about loss. And again, I have been struck by the ways survivors have transmitted resilience alongside grief. Many young Bosnians have become active custodians of memory, not because they experienced the genocide themselves, but because they understand remembrance as an ethical responsibility. A recent example illustrates this well. During the current FIFA World Cup, several members of the Bosnian national football team, players born in the diaspora, to families directly affected by the war and genocide, spoke publicly about Srebrenica. Their interventions were not political performances, but deeply personal expressions of inherited responsibility. They showed that remembrance belongs not only in archives, memorials, and academic conferences, but also in everyday public life. Memory survives because each generation discovers its own language for carrying it forward. This is especially important because remembrance continues to face organized denial. From an anthropological perspective, denial is much more than an alternative interpretation of history. It is a continuation of violence by other means. It delegitimizes survivors' experiences, questions their testimony, undermines judicial findings, and reproduces insecurity within communities already marked by profound loss. In doing so, it also forecloses the possibility of genuine reconciliation. One survivor once told me that hearing people deny the genocide felt like being told my sons never existed. That sentence has stayed with me because it captures what denial actually does. It turns established historical truth back onto something that must be argued over and repeatedly proven. It forces survivors again and again to defend not only the reality of what they endured, but even the existence of the loved ones they lost. Denial also shapes everyday life in less visible ways. It affects returnees who must live alongside public celebrations of convicted war criminals. It enters school curricula, political speeches, public discourse, and even popular culture. And yet, despite everything, the story of Srebrenica is not only one of destruction. One of the most remarkable findings from my research has been the extraordinary capacity of survivors to rebuild meaningful lives without abandoning memory. Whether they returned to Eastern Bosnia or established new homes in the diaspora, they demonstrated that rebuilding is not the opposite of remembering. The two often sustain one another. This is perhaps one reason why anthropology has something distinctive to contribute to conversations about genocide. It reminds us that post-genocide recovery is rarely complete and that resilience should never be romanticized. Survivors do not simply overcome violence. They learn to live with its enduring presence while refusing to let it define the entirety of their existence. 31 years after the genocide, Srebrenica therefore asks us to think differently about memory itself. Memory is not a fixed archive of past events. It is a living social practice, continually reshaped through everyday relationships, family history, public rituals, and moral choices. It crosses borders, generations, and languages. It exists simultaneously in Potocari and in the homes of diaspora families thousands of kilometers away. It is carried not only by survivors, but increasingly by those born after the violence who understand that remembering is itself an act of responsibility. At the same time, memory cannot be separated from truth. Where denial persists, remembrance becomes more than commemoration. It becomes an ethical obligation. It affirms the dignity of victims, protects historical knowledge, and creates the conditions for democratic accountability. Without truth, memory risks becoming merely symbolic. Without memory, truth loses its social life. Perhaps that's the enduring lesson of Srebrenica 31 years on. The struggle is no longer only what happened in July 1995. It is over what kind of society we choose to build afterwards. One founded on historical accountability or historical revisionism. One that recognizes human dignity or one that continues to deny it. As social scientists and other researchers, our task is not simply to document violence. It is to understand how people continue living in its aftermath, how communities reconstruct social worlds after profound rupture, and how memory travels across generations and across continents without losing its moral force. For me, Srebrenica will always be both a place of profound loss and a place of enduring human resilience. It reminds us that genocide seeks not only to destroy lives, but also to erase memory, belonging, and the possibility of a shared future. Remembering, therefore, is never simply about looking backward. It is about the kind of future we choose to build. 31 years after July 1995, the greatest tribute we can pay to those who were murdered is not remembrance alone, but the insistence that truth matters, that denial must never prevail over evidence, and that human dignity must never be sacrificed for political agendas. Every survivor's testimony, every family story, every child who learns what happened, every scholar who insists on historical truth, and every community that gathers to remember affirms the same simple but powerful message. Genocide did not have the final word. Our collective commitment to truth, memory, and justice does. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Halilovich, for your insight and sharing your experiences and perspective with us. If I may ask you a question, how is the memory of Srebrenica being transformed across generations in the diaspora, and are we at risk of losing its meaning as lived experience fades?
Thank you very much. And the answer could be in your presence, your very presence being here with us, speaking Bosnian with a German accent and, growing up in a completely different social reality. But tomorrow there's a big gathering in Melbourne, organized not by survivors, not by academics, not by community activists, but by an organization that was established a few years ago, I think 2 years ago. It's called Children of Srebrenica. These are children, new generation, some were born during the war, but don't have lived memory of it, and others, most other, after that. And they are organizing very sophisticated commemorative events for mainstream audiences like this, outside of kind of community, and that kind of also connecting with their peers, with their fellow Melbournians, fellow Australians, something that belongs to that generation, something that's done differently, and something that also gives us hope that will continue to be performed in the future, not as a, just honoring the memory, but actively engaging with new generations and new audiences. So it does, I have a great hope, and I'm so so inspired by these young people who actually do it in their own way, but much more sophisticated, I would say, than in my generation.
Thank you, Professor Halilovich. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Wolfgang Petritsch, former High Representative for Bosnia and Herzegovina. During his time as High Representative, Mr. Petritsch played an important role in the establishment of the Srebrenica Potocari Memorial Center and the creation of the Srebrenica Foundation. We look forward to hearing his reflection and experiences.
Hvala Iris, dragi bosanski prijatelji. I have no written speech prepared because I want to speak from my heart. For me, Bosnia, to je moja druga domovina. And therefore, for me, this is very close to my heart, I can tell you. This gathering, this commemoration takes place at a very crucial moment in the history, in the post-war history of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And again, the international community, and I know what I'm talking about because I had to deal with the international community as the representative of this community, is in dire straits when it comes to the future of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Instead of resolutely walking the road from Dayton to Brussels, we Europeans are still wondering how do we should achieve this. And this, ladies and gentlemen, my dear friends, is really a big, big disaster, more so for Europe in particular, and above all, of course, also for Bosnia-Herzegovina and its people. We know how many young people are leaving their country, their homeland, because they see no future there. So this is something that we Europeans, we Austrians in particular, as neighbors, as those who have welcomed you here in this country, we should be much more resolute in turning Bosnia-Herzegovina into a real European country, into a member of the European Union eventually. That this really is what Srebrenica is all about. Because Srebrenica is the symbol for Bosnia and Herzegovina when it comes to the past, to the bloody past, as well when it comes to the future of this country. Eventually, reconciliation will only take place over the graveyard in Potocari. Reconciliation is something which we Austrians know from our own past, how difficult it is to admit that we have a responsibility for our past, for our country, and for what has happened in the past. Only then we will be able to overcome this legacy and work in a way for the future which then would leave the young generations in Bosnia-Herzegovina to be more confident about their own country and about their personal future. Now let me explain very briefly how I came into all of this. I was appointed High Representative in the years after the war, and Srebrenica was not figuring high on the agenda. It was the return of refugees and IDPs, more than 2 million refugees and IDPs, you know this all. There were more than 100,000 people killed in this war. These were the major challenges that we as the international community, I as the High Representative, had to deal with in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The economy, the infrastructure was fully destroyed. So these were the issues that we had to tackle. And of course, it was necessary. And we achieved a certain I would not say it was a great success, but we did achieve a certain success in this, in stabilizing post-war Bosnia and Herzegovina, in feeding the people, the survivors. But as soon I realized how important Srebrenica, this town with this beautiful name in the eastern part of Bosnia-Herzegovina, how important to deal with this, with the consequences of Srebrenica has become to me. And some of my first encounters with the survivors, with the mothers of Srebrenica, who came to see me in Sarajevo, was one of my most emotional parts of the job that I did in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I had many emotional encounters with the refugees coming back, seeing their destroyed homes, seeing what has happened to their fields, to their agriculture, and to their apartments and whatsoever, to their friends and neighbors. But these meetings made very clear to me that I need to tackle this issue of really establishing a location where the survivors can remember and also deal with the loss of their loved ones. And I remember talking with partners in the international community. Of course, I had, at the time, there was still 30,000 troops there from S4, which meant that the American general had a very important say in all of this. The NATO was, of course, very important in all of this. And when I discussed the ideas that I had developed together with the survivors, with the mothers of Srebrenica, enclaves and Žepa and so on, I realized actually I did not have the full support which would have been needed. NATO said, listen, doing this in Potocari in the middle of Serb territory, this spells a disaster. How can you guarantee the security and safety of what you want to do there? And I said, you have to guarantee this. It's not up to me to guarantee this. But I soon realized also that without the consent of the Serb community of Republika Srpska, of the officials, it's going to be a very difficult thing to realize. So what I did was a step-by-step approach. First, of course, we needed the idea, a plan, how to implement. And the cemetery, which now has this very impressive location there with almost more than 7,000 graveyards, was a mice field. There was nothing there. So the first step, actually, the first necessary legal and practical step was to design this location for the future cemetery of the victims of the genocide. And by the way, I was the first, actually, because Jeffrey Nice was speaking about the issue of genocide. And already early on, when I was very much involved in all of this, I realized this was a planned and very intricately planned the event. So it was genocide, in fact. This I said already before the ICC and ICJ really then took these decisions. But it became very clear to me on the ground that what has happened there is really genocide. But that's just an aside. So the next thing that we did was the battery factory on the opposite side of the now cemetery. It was already underway to be privatized by the Republika Srpska. I stopped the privatization, and I had to decide, I wanted to decide to have the memorial center there. So these are the two elements, the two pillars, so to speak, of the Srebrenica Potocari Memorial Center and Cemetery, which in 2000, starting in 2000, and then in 2001 and 2003, and some of my successors, in particular Paddy Ashdown and also Mr. Schwarz-Schilling, they then added and formalized some of the things that we had put in place at the time. And always I was extremely carefully watching, can we preserve the safety and the sacredness, so to speak, of this location. And I spoke, as distinctly remember, I spoke to the then president of Republika Srpska, Mr. Šarović, and I said, you are now, I put you into the responsibility for the safety of this place. And if anything happens, I will have to dispose you. You will not any longer be the president there. And it worked in many ways, and it worked. And NATO eventually and S4 became convinced, okay, that was actually the right decision that was done. Of course, as I said, Srebrenica is far more than just a cemetery. When I attended, and I see the Australian ambassador there last year, together we attended the commemoration, also the two-day conference, international conference before this, we saw how important this is, not just for the survivors, not just for Bosnia and Herzegovina, but really for Europe. Europe, the once continent of wars, for hundreds and hundreds of years, wars were fought on European soil. And only the European Union stopped these wars. There is, in the 80 years since the existence of the European Union, of the European integration, there's no war has been fought on European Union territory. This is a first. This is a total historic exception for Europe. And of course, we do want Bosnia-Herzegovina, as well as the other countries in the so-called Western Balkans, to become part of this European Union. Because Europe is a peace project. And we know now, under these dramatically changed global circumstances, where the liberal world order is coming to a close, where power politics has entered international relations, we do need to forcefully move ahead and include Bosnia, Herzegovina, include, and maybe I see the ambassador from Montenegro, maybe Montenegro will be the first to enter the European Union. Hopefully the next will also come then. And this is actually how I see the future of Bosnia, how I see the future of the Western Balkans as such. Because the Western Balkans, the 6 countries in the Western Balkans, this is not enlargement. This is a consolidation of the European Union territory. Enlargement, when we talk about enlargement, then we talk about Ukraine. But when we talk about the Western Balkans, we talk about the consolidation which would enhance the security, the safety, and the economic progress of the European Union. Now let me come to a close. I would like to say that my idea at the time was driven by the fact that we needed accountability, that there is no progress without peace, no economic, no social progress. And I have to say that that at the time, the single most important thought was to stop impunity. For more than 3 years, almost 4 years, the war in Bosnia was about impunity, about killing, about giving a terrible time to the innocent citizens there. So this is actually why I believe that we need to really move on when it comes to the rule of law, when it comes to cooperation, and when it comes to the remembrance of what has happened, and only then the basis is being laid in order to come to an eventual reconciliation and peace and progress, economic progress as well. These are some of my thoughts which I wanted to share with you. I know it was not a perfect speech, but let me again say it really comes from my heart. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Petritsch, for your meaningful remarks and for being with us today. Allow me to ask you one question. How do you see genocide denial today, and what should have been done long ago to prevent it? How, should I repeat the question?
Can you repeat the
Yes. How do you see genocide denial today, and what should have been done long time to prevent it?
Well, I mean, this is something which is extremely bothersome, and also something which this denial, and Professor Halilovich has spoken very eloquently about the issue of denial. And I remember when we, at the time in the early 2000s, when I had the meetings with the Serb side in Banja Luka, in Sarajevo, in Srebrenica, in many other places as well, there was quite an understanding that Serbs need to come to terms with what has happened in their name. This, unfortunately, is not the case any longer. There is really no progress. On the contrary, I remember in 2004, the then president of Republika Srpska, Dragan Čavić, was the one who said, terrible things have happened. We Serbs have a responsibility in all of this. And the government of Republika Srpska in Banja Luka in November of 2004 formally apologized for Srebrenica. Where do we stand now? I must say I see a joint responsibility on the part of the international community, because I at the time believed that reconciliation will only be possible if people, citizens from all different ethnic communities, citizens, meet in Srebrenica and jointly commemorate what has happened. There were attempts to do this. Yeah, I remember I was there when Sir President Tadić was there. I remember when even President Vučić was there. And unfortunately, it was not well prepared, I should say. And there was a big uproar in Potocari. I remember this. And so that was actually a huge backlash also. Yeah? And when I look now at Mr. Dodik, with whom when I was dealing with him, and I had a good working relationship with Mr. Dodik and Mr. Tihic and Mr. Čović at the time, we managed a thorough reform of the two entity constitutions. Only since then, since 2001, non-Serbs, meaning Bosniaks and Croats, have the same rights in Republika Srpska. And Serbs in the federation have the same rights with the Bosniaks and the Croats. Unfortunately, that was never really further developed. But even today you have of course you have a Serb president in Republika Srpska, but you have two vice presidents who are Bosniak and Croat. What I'm missing also is more energy on the part of the citizens. And here, of course, the majority plays a very important role. And the Serbs themselves need to have the greatest interest to stop this nonsense, this criminal nonsense, to say that nothing happened in Srebrenica. This is something which is absolutely unacceptable. This is uncultured. This is uncivilized. This is really what we are talking about. We're not talking about politics. We're talking about an ethical approach. We're talking about a moral standing. This is really why I believe, and there I fully agree with Professor Halilovich, that what we see now is actually like a second murder of those people who were killed in Srebrenica and beyond.
Thank you for your answer. We will now take a moment to watch a short film in memory of the victims of the genocide in Srebrenica. The film will begin now.
Memorijalni centar Srebrenica Potočari osnovan je odlukom visokog predstavnika 2000. godine. Mjesto je sjećanja na žrtve genocida iz jula 1995. godine i posvećen je očuvanju historije i suočavanju sa silama neznanja i mržnje koje uzrokuju genocid.
I now have the pleasure of inviting Mr. Asim Dorović, Minister Chancellor and Chargé d'Affaires at interim of the Permanent Mission of Bosnia and Herzegovina to the OSCE, the United Nations, and other international organizations in Vienna to deliver the closing remarks.
Thank you, Iris. Good afternoon, everybody. Excellencies, distinguished panelists, dear colleagues and guests. It is my true pleasure and an honor to share the stage both in person and online with such distinguished speakers and with all of you here in this room. I want to thank them for their powerful words, powerful messages, powerful stories. I want to thank all of you for being here with us today. We've gathered today with humility and solemn respect here today to mark 31 years since the Srebrenica genocide in 1995. We gather first and foremost to remember the 8,372 boys and men who were systematically and brutally murdered in the UN-safe area in Srebrenica. To remember the families of those men and boys who were torn apart. To remember the mothers and sisters, wives and children, and whole communities that have carried grief with dignity for now more than 3 decades. Yet nothing we say today can undo their suffering, and nor ceremony can restore the lives that were taken. But remembrance is not a passive act. It's a commitment to protect the truth, to honor the victims, and to ensure that future generations understand what happened in Srebrenica, why it happened, and what the world must do to prevent such crimes from ever happening again. Srebrenica stands as one of the darkest chapters in modern European history, the largest massacre in Europe since the Holocaust. And it's also a stark reminder of the failure of the international community to protect those who had been promised safety. It's precisely that failure that obliges us not only to mourn, but to learn. Not only to speak, but to act. Reconciliation can't be built on silence. It can't be built on denial, distortion, or selective memory. Genuine reconciliation requires compassion, courage, and above all, acceptance of established facts, of established truth, both historically and judicially. Professor Halilovich spoke strongly when he said denial is a continuation of violence by other means, which is precisely why we must defend facts with clarity and dignity. We must support education based on evidence. We must preserve archives, testimonies, court records, and the voices of survivors. We must teach young people that confronting the truth is not an act of division, but it's a foundation for a more peaceful future. So let this anniversary be a moment of renewed commitment to remembrance without hatred, to reconciliation without denial, to peace without forgetting, and to truth without compromise. May all of us here and around the world, through our words and our actions, help build a future in which such evil is never, ever repeated again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Duhan. Thank you, Mr. Dorović. As we come to the end of today's conference, I would like to sincerely thank all of our speakers for today's valuable contributions and all of you for your presence, attention, and engagement. Thank you once again for being here with us today.